All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to talk about something I think a lot of us can relate to. We're exploring the architecture of hyper-independence. Let's take a look at the blueprints of how it gets built.
It all really starts with this question, doesn't it? Why is asking for help so hard? Maybe you feel that when you're completely overwhelmed with work, or you're wrestling with a personal problem. That simple act of just reaching out, it can feel almost impossible. So why is that?
You know, if that question hits home, then this slide probably looks pretty familiar. This is what we could call the armor of I'm fine. It's taking on way too much, even when you're basically drowning. It's that little voice in your head that whispers that needing someone else is a weakness. It even makes you push help away when people offer it. And it's all driven by this deep, compulsive need to prove you can handle everything yourself, because you've learned to believe you're the only one you can truly count on.
We've all heard this, right? Maybe we've even said it. But for a person who is hyper-independent, this isn't just some cynical little catchphrase. Oh no, it's a core belief. It's like a fundamental rule written into their operating system, and it justifies never, ever relying on anyone else. But where in the world does a rule like that come from?
Well, to understand the architecture, we have to go back to the original foundation. And that foundation, it's often laid in our earliest years, in the experience of being, or at least feeling like, the unchosen child.
And that's the crucial point here. This intense self-reliance, this fortress that you might have built around yourself, it's not something you were born with. It wasn't a choice you consciously made as an adult. It was literally forged in the fire of your childhood experiences.
It starts right here. See, a child is naturally wired to seek comfort and validation and help. But what happens when they express those needs, for attention, for reassurance, for safety, and they're just met with silence or dismissal or impatience, and it happens over and over and over again? Well, they learn a really brutal lesson in survival. They start to internalize this belief that is just absolutely heartbreaking for a kid to hold. My feelings aren't important. Or even, no one is coming. And when you believe that no one is coming to save you, what choice do you have? You learn to become your own rescuer.
And this slide just illustrates that transformation perfectly. On the left, you've got the silent, desperate plea of the child. It's this raw need for connection and support. Then on the right, you see the adult's protective response. Now these two statements, they're polar opposites, right? But one is a direct result of the other. The adult's declaration of "I'm fine" is the armor that was built to protect the memory of that child's unanswered plea.
So, how exactly does this all happen? Let's move on to the mechanism and see how this fortress gets built, brick by painful brick. First, let's just be very, very clear about what we're talking about. Hyperindependence is not a personality flaw. It's not a badge of honor. It is, at its core, a protection mechanism. Its entire purpose is to defend against the perceived danger of relying on others, a danger that, at one point, felt very, very real.
What's so interesting here is how this lays out the process so clearly. It's a chain reaction. First, the need. Second, the dismissal. Third, the critical lesson is learned. To survive, I can only count on myself. And fourth, the construction begins. A wall goes up to make sure you never have to feel the sting of that disappointment ever again.
And we really have to honor that. This fortress, which might be causing you problems today, was once a brilliant adaptation. For that child who felt alone, learning to be hyper-independent wasn't a mistake. It was the smartest, most effective way to protect themselves in an environment where their needs just weren't being met. It worked. So now that we understand the origins and the mechanics, what do we do with this information? What is the key takeaway from understanding this blueprint? This right here, this is probably the most important point of this entire explainer. If you see these traits in yourself, the goal is not to judge yourself. It's to understand that you are running on an old, outdated protection plan. It was designed for a different time and for a different set of dangers. Just let that sink in for a second. The very thing that might feel like a barrier to connection today, that was once your shield. It kept you safe, it got you through. And acknowledging its original purpose is the very first step toward deciding if you still need it to be quite so strong today. And that brings us to our final question. We've explored the architecture, we've read the original blueprints, we know why the fortress was built. So the real question for you to take away is this. Now that you know its story, what is that fortress really protecting you from today? And, more importantly, is it still a threat?